I mean, as a rapper, there is nothing I like more than talking about myself at the best of times. But this has been absolutely fascinating, really eye-opening, particularly in terms of the kind of questions that you asked and how you interpreted them.
You'll spend 80,000 hours at work. You're here because you want those hours to count. Hi, I'm Zoe Schofield.
And I'm Erica Sosna. A warm welcome to the Career Equation podcast. On this podcast, we take time out from our award-winning careers consultancy to share a game-changing formula to help you solve the sum of your life.
Each week, we and our guests use the career equation to explore their story so far and help them unlock the secrets of a fulfilling career.
Paul, also known as Professor Elemental, had many jobs before becoming a full-time Victorian rapper. His stepping stones include being a special needs educator, a customer service professional, and a carer. Find out how he made the leap to the creative industries and what's next in store for him in this episode of The Career Equation.
Oh, thanks very much. Lovely to be here. Yes, I am mostly known as Professor Elemental, a rapper, speaker, writer, and all-round loon, basically, running around the country, performing shows and making silly songs.
Sounds like, for many people, an absolute dream, right? Lots of us have dreams about living a creative life and taking the leap, but you've actually done it and you've made it work over coming on for a decade or longer than that now.
Yes, slightly longer than that, actually. Yeah, coming on for about sort of 15 years. And we've known each other about that length of time as well. You know, we've been mates slightly longer than that, but we even lived together briefly, both when we were starting our projects, weren't we?
Yeah, sort of simultaneously incubating our dream jobs and supporting one another with how scary that can feel right at the beginning as well.
Absolutely. And you gave me my first office. You saved me from morbid obesity because I spent my first year as Professor Elemental thinking, I don't have a job anymore. I can sit in bed eating crisps and answering emails. And then I got really unhealthy, felt quite unwell. And it was at that point you were like, there is a space at the place I've got an office. I was like, oh, thank God. So you saved me from myself and I appreciate that.
I'm glad to have been of service to your health and well-being, but I will just also say, what is a life as a freelancer or an entrepreneur if you cannot choose to spend a duvet day stuffing yourself with crisps and working from your bed? I mean, everyone deserves that day every so often.
Absolutely. And I think as well, most freelancers I know, in fact, all freelancers I know, even ones that don't perform at weekends, work really random days and really random hours. You have to do stuff in the evenings and on Sundays. So one of the big advantages to being a freelancer, as far as I'm concerned, is having a random Tuesday off that you've chosen yourself while everybody else is at work. And occasionally walking past people's offices and mocking them because they're at work or not.
Smugly taking your time off to just go and do whatever or just get back in bed. So one of the things I wanted to start us with was the fact that this is not your first incarnation. This is not your first rodeo in terms of careers. And I think that's always really interesting for listeners to know when people have made a significant shift. So can you give us just a little bit of kind of backstory about how you got here?
Absolutely. It's a very, as it is for all people when you get to, I'm nearly 50 now, so inevitably the path's a bit windy. But I've failed in an incredible amount of careers. There's not many jobs that I haven't been fired from. I'm almost unemployable.
Give us a short list.
I've been fired from so many jobs. When the kids were little, I'd walk them to school and they'd look up at me in the way that I imagine children look up at war veteran fathers and say, Daddy, tell us some more stories of jobs that you were fired from. I was like, once I was an ice cream man. If they weren't from lack of trying, I worked customer services for an industrial glove company, or I ran a call center. I was a toy tester at one point. I worked in advertising and marketing, and all of the office-based roles I really hated. I knew I could do them, but I really struggled, and I always felt like there was something else that I should be doing. And then for a good while, I was a teacher of young people with special needs. And I was really, really happy in that world. That was a wonderful thing to do. But it was also quite exhausting. There is often a bit of a time limit, I think, unless you're an absolute superhero who kind of manage that sort of job for a long period. So just as I was starting to get a bit ground down by it, I'd always been rapping on the side, but just as a little sort of hobby, really. And just as I was in my mid-30s about to give it up, I did a one-off show as this crazy character called Professor Elemental, sort of mad Victorian explorer that was also a rapper. And it was only ever supposed to be a one-off. It was almost like my swan song before I stopped rapping altogether. And just at that point, I realised that it worked better than any of the other stuff that I'd been trying to do. I'd always loved hip-hop, but been slightly at odds with my middle-class whiteness and trying to find a way to make that work in music. Mm-hmm. And then I did a video with a lovely chap called Moog for a song about cups of tea. And it was in the days where YouTube would randomly throw up stuff on its front page and the algorithm hadn't been perfected. And by luck or design, it was on the front page of YouTube just for like a day all around the world.
Wow.
So it was one of the sort of quite an early thing to go viral, but it went totally viral. And from then started getting offers of shows, and it just blossomed. And it was that sort of, I'm in my mid-30s here. I need to make the jump, or that's probably the last chance I'll have to make the jump into a creative life. And so I did. And I've been hustling ever since, with the main motivator being that I really don't want to have to get a job ever again.
And quite frankly, who'd have you, given that list of what you've already exhausted?
Exactly. There's not many places that I could even try and get a job at this stage, so it has to work. And that is a brilliant motivator for creativity.
You also have a family, and I'm guessing that that's like quite an anxiety driver when you step into freelance with, you had, 2 young daughters then when you started. And tell us about that and how that's influenced your career drive as well.
Hugely. And it was a real, such a leap of faith from my lovely partner, Helen, and, having to come to her and saying, now, I was on track to become a head teacher. I've had a different idea. And she was like, okay, well, if you can make it work, give it a try. But she was very supportive, and that made a huge difference. But again, knowing that you are the breadwinner and you have to bring in a certain amount every month really helps. And all joking aside about my unemployability, I did spend quite a long period in certain office-based jobs doing sort of sales or marketing or customer services, and coming into a creative career slightly later with those pressures involved means that I treat it more like a job than I might have done had I been in my sort of 20s. I realised a lot of the things I didn't like about office life were really about office culture. I didn't actually mind the work. There's a huge amount of administration involved if you're any kind of freelancer, in terms of invoicing and marketing yourself and all of that kind of stuff. Even in terms of sales, like all those sales jobs I hated so much, those skills are so important now when it comes to being tenacious, trying to get gigs and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So as it often feels, I think, when you get to your middle ages, it's easy to make a narrative feel like it was all supposed to be, but all of the things that I didn't enjoy on the way to getting here were very important for where I am now.
Yeah, it turned out to be useful. And I really pick up on that point of you saying, coming to it later in life with a family to support. As an artist, I wasn't mucking about, like it needed to make a living. Whereas like I know in my 20s when I ran my social enterprise, I didn't make that much money from it, but I learned an awful amount from it, and I didn't have any other dependents. So it wasn't that risky if it wasn't that great a month. Whereas when there's 4 of you, that needs to make sense, and it is kind of more serious than, even if you have a lot of fun in your performance, it's important that it works out. So you've done incredibly well to sustain that level of income, and I'm sure people will be interested to hear some more about that. But so let's talk a little bit about what's brought you here, like your kind of question, conundrum. Where are you at in your career, and what would you like to get out of this discussion?
Well, it's an interesting time for me because I heard one of my favourite writers, John Ronson, talking about as you get to your 40s in a set career, some of your ambition leaves you. I've not lost none of my drive, but in terms of I've got to do the next thing and the next thing, get bigger and bigger and bigger. And in a lot of ways, my career has plateaued in a way that I'm really happy with. I've got a really lovely niche audience. I do all the things I like, and I've got loads of creative people to collaborate with, and that's fantastic. But it's a really tough time to be an independent creative person at the moment. Since COVID, I think we've lost something like a quarter of small music venues, the kind of places that are my bread and butter. And I went through my list of sort of contacts thinking, let's get some stuff set up for next year. And I went through an old spreadsheet that I hadn't looked at for a while. And it was like about 75% of the events and the venues didn't exist anymore. And on top of that, people have got less money for coming out, that kind of stuff. So I'm having to work harder for less returns.
If you're a freelance creative, you're probably feeling the pinch in the same way as Paul describes. When we have a regular base of referrals, gigging can be heaven, but when the channel runs dry, it can be really stressful and frightening. To mitigate this, consider ways to diversify your income, ways to share your skill set with a different audience, perhaps in a different medium, and revisit both lapsed clients and your established clients to ask for referrals. and join one of our free Career Matters career action sessions on LinkedIn Live to support the freelance creative community.
If I'm honest with myself, I am a wacky comedic rapper who had his sort of a moment of novelty was a long time ago. It was like 15 years ago. So I'm having a constant kind of reinvent that kind of thing. There was a genre called steampunk, a kind of nerdy Victoriana science fiction thing that was very popular back then. And it still exists, and there's still steampunk events, but it's not quite as huge as it was. So for me, it's about trying to find ways to diversify and to future-proof my career and make it work. There's a lot of lovely creative other things that I do, from bespoke songs to voiceover work to writing books and all that kind of stuff. And they all bring in little bits and pieces, but it's working out what direction to move into. So yeah, the main question I'm asking is, how can I future-proof this funny little career of mine?
Yeah, creative career as well. Yeah,
exactly.
Brilliant. Well, let's see what the equation has in store for us. And it'd be wonderful to spend this time with you and do some coaching around it. So I'll briefly recap what the equation is and does, and then we'll move into your moments as we do in the structure. So the career equation basically says there are 4 key components to a fulfilling and thriving career. And over now 20 years of coaching people, I found that they broadly sit in these 4 buckets of concern or consideration. So the first one is, am I playing to my strengths? Am I doing what I'm good at? What are those strengths? And how might I use them, capitalize them, enhance them, develop them so that I feel like I'm thriving and evolving in my skills and abilities? The second is, how do I take those and apply them to something that I love, that I'm into, that gives me pleasure and energy? And do I know what those things are? Are they subjects or are they ways of being? So, we might love music, but we also may love connecting with a crowd, right? So like both the subject area and the activity that gives you the energy. And we want to know as much as we can about that so that we can spend time in that space. And then the third is, to what extent am I feeling successful? And how am I measuring and defining what a successful life looks and feels like for me? What is it that I track that makes me feel like I'm impactful? And we want to be able to align with that as much as possible. Then our work feels worth it. It feels worthwhile. And then the last thing is, what kind of environments help me do my best work? What brings the best out in me? Whether that's where we work, how we work, who we work with, who our clients are, how quickly we get paid, what we get to drink, and all of the, everything from the kind of minutiae to the kind of economic and climatic environmental questions as well. So the equation seeks to help people to really get into a deep dive on those 4 areas and to find the sweet spot between the 4 of them to define thriving and to move towards that and continue to evolve that. And that's really what our work does. So without further ado, I ask each of my guests to define a moment in relation to those 4 components of the equation. And I want us to start with strengths. So here's my question. Can you give us a moment in your life, hopefully earlier in your life, where you discovered that you had a real strength and ability for something?
This is potentially a bit of a strange example, but I like to largely define myself by my failures. I think it's a much more interesting and useful way to go about things. And my earliest memory of sort of performing outside of school plays and stuff was one of the first comic relief days in high school. And I had this idea that we should do a comedy show, me and my little nerdy friends. And we rehearsed it, and we turned up at the school hall, and all the cool kids had formed a band and they were playing, and the whole school was watching them, and they were doing a really successful, brilliant little gig. But because it was my turn and I had booked the school hall, and excuse me, sir, I think that you'll find I'm supposed to be on now. And the teacher, I always remember him looking at me like, really? And me going, yeah, I would like to do my show. Thank you very much. And so this poor teacher had to stop the gig, usher off this band of cool kids. They all went off to the music room. The entire crowd followed them. There was just a few teachers and a few other nerds watching. And then to an audience of practically no one, we muddled our way through this terrible comedy show that I'd written. It was the saddest little thing. I don't remember. Obviously, it was embarrassing, but I think I sort of thrived on embarrassment in school, and I don't remember feeling particularly bad about it, other than just sort of realizing that, it was a mistake on every level, but it also showed a bit of tenacity and a bit of not being afraid to fail quite publicly. And I think that is, that's a very useful thing in any kind of freelance thing, particularly if you're self-employed, or in fact any job at all. You have to be able to take some rejection along the way, often quite a lot of rejection. Obviously, coupled with that, now that I'm not a child, you need to be judicious with that, not just constantly go, it's my turn all the time, regardless of the rejection, because that would make you an awful person. But there was definitely a lesson to be learned in that.
I think that I was just reflecting in 20 years of career coaching, when I've asked people, what's your natural strength? I have never heard someone say surviving humiliation. And I think it's so valid, because if you're going to be a performer of any kind, you are going to bomb frequently. I remember I did a stand-up comedy course many years ago, just for fun, really, just to kind of improve my spontaneity skills and stuff. And generally it had gone quite well in the showcase. People laughed at my jokes. I was feeling quite pleased with myself. But someone booked me a gig at the end of a poetry event, which I should have already gone, this is not the event, Anyway, it was so awful. And I died so badly. And with every single laugh, where there should have been a laugh, there was just a gap, a dreadful silence where people just sort of stroked their beards at me and looked confused. And it was so awful. Thank God I had a good friend smiling hysterically in the front, just keeping me going. It was so awful that I had to run down the street afterwards, fluffing my ego, as in sort of hitting my body, going, it's okay, you're still alive, you're a good person. You're a good person. And that's so important. Like, that ability, as you said, whatever it is you want to achieve in life, you're going to have to fail fast, and like becoming resilient about that and getting through it, I think, is really key.
Definitely. If I ever tell a story, if I had a weekend of gigs and they've all gone really well, I don't really mention them to my friends, but if one of them was a disaster in any possible, and there's so many ways it could go wrong, you could be badly booked, could be you, could be the audience, a million different things, but those always make the good stories, and those are the ones that I learn from. The first time you got a bit too drunk and did a show and realised that's a terrible idea is how you learn not to drink before you go on stage. And so, yes, learning through failure is key. And even, again, in the performing world, I remember, I think it was Stuart Lee said, no performer gets away with having no bad gigs. And it's usually, if I have a run of really good ones, like 5 or 6 ones, and I start getting a bit like, I am pretty damn good at this performing lark, I will have one where I'm a disaster, and it'll be my fault as well. And it's very important to have your ego punctured, I think, on a regular basis.
As a manager, mentor, or leader, how do we help our people to embrace failure and learn from their mistakes? The only way to learn is through experimentation and practice, but we can get very anxious when we feel these learning moments are under observation or are potentially risky or costly to our firm. What is your appetite for risk as an organisation? How much freedom to experiment do you reasonably want to give while maintaining quality and safety? Creating a culture that celebrates learning, encourages innovation, and is open and honest that growth often requires everyone getting comfortable with being uncomfortable, gives everyone permission to explore and fail constructively.
And I think it's so true. I'm always saying to my small child, you only learn things by getting them wrong. That is the process. If you want to learn to play the piano, you play your scales wrongly until you play them right. And even then, as you say, there will still be fluffs and unexpected things. So the skill of failing fast definitely sits in your stable. But I also want to be generous with you about also that writing and creativity and performing. Like, tell us a bit about when you discovered actually that, putting something together in that way was something you were natural at, and which bits of it are you most strong at? Because I always think even in a sort of general area of strength, there's a sweet spot within that. So I'd love to hear some more about that for you.
So I love writing. That's one of the things, again, as I get in a little bit older, I think I'm enjoying the writing process more in terms of short films and stories and that kind of stuff. I really enjoy sitting on my own, tapping away. But equally, I love collaboration, I think, is probably the other strength. I do well in a collaboration, because creatively, if you're just out there floating on your own, you can get a bit lost in yourself. And there's no quality control as well. You can do stuff that you think is terrible and someone goes, oh my God, no, you're on the right track there, or vice versa. So finding people, creating stuff with them, collaborating, creating little pocket universes and little projects, And increasingly, because I've been doing this quite a while now, and I've had a few brushes, sort of near brushes with the mainstream or with fame or brief appearances on TV or possible TV shows and things like that, rather than try too hard to knock on a door that is often closed, I'm much happier in creating something that I'm in total control of. So me and my collaborator go, right, we're going to write this book. We'll get someone to do the illustrations. We'll pay them. We're going to kickstart the entire thing. We'll work out how much money we're going to make. And we're going to make 200 copies of the book. And then I'll sell them at my shows. And it's a really tiny, very modest business model. But if you do lots of those with lots of interesting people, you've got a very varied career. And it's up to you whether it succeeds or fails as well. You're not relying on anybody else or constantly pitching things, which is the most, depressing and bleak process. Going, do you like my thing? Oh, you don't. What about you? Do you like my thing? I can't be doing with that anymore.
And what I hear in there also is something about a strength of initiating, and you probably take it as read. I think with some of our strengths, we really forget that they are things that other people do not possess. The ability to just start from scratch with nothing and have a stab and see it through to become merchandise in your event is no small feat. It's a real combination of strengths to see that through.
Thank you. That's very kind of you to say. I think there's a lot of ideas floating around, and what I've realized is at the beginning of every year, I make a big wall chart of all these possible things and possible collaborations, and knowing that not every single one of them is going to succeed. Sometimes it just doesn't work between you and a collaborator. They might have other stuff, or you might have other stuff that you need to do. Sometimes the idea is just not quite strong enough, and you sort of test it with an audience and they're not that bothered by it. So it's having this huge pile of ideas and then weeding through them and then taking them. Because having an idea is so easy. Having a brilliant idea is no trouble at all, but acting on it and getting it to the end, that's the really tricky part.
Brilliant. Well, we'll talk some more about it because I think there's some things to pick up there. But let's go on to pleasures and passions. So I want to know about a moment where you really loved what you were doing.
At the risk of sounding a bit precocious, that happens to me at least once a week. That's the best part of this job. I'm never going to be that well known. I'm never going to be that well paid. But every day brings so much variety. There'll be a day where I'm recording a voiceover for a video game, and then I'm having a cup of tea with someone that I'm going to make a short horror film with. Then I have to record a bespoke song for somebody's birthday about going to the moon and finding a monkey. Those kind of days just fill me with so much happiness because there's so much variety and there's lots of little tasks within them. So yeah, I'm very, very lucky in that respect. It's balanced out by the time that I'll have to drive 6 hours to play for 20 people, and then I don't get paid for 3 months, or I spend ages working on some song and release it, and then by the afternoon that I've released it, no one's really remembered it or cared about it. So there is definitely a balance there, but every week will bring some kind of joy to it.
That's lovely. And I really hear that there's kind of, zany is good. The sort of the more eclectic, eccentric, unusual brings you a lot of pleasure just to kind of apply yourself to that. But also that variety is definitely the spice of life. So the opportunity to get stuck into many different creative tasks is really a kind of massive source of joy and energy for you, which is lovely to hear. And let's talk about impact then. So feeling successful, feeling like the things that you do matter. Can you give us a particular touch point where you've really felt that?
Yeah, again, one of the nice things about being a performer and not just a writer or a recording artist is that you're constantly connecting with the people you're making music for. And it reminds you that there is millions of them, but there's a dedicated group of people who do actually listen to your stuff. And I have numerous nice little moments. A lot of my songs are about inclusivity and mental health and finding joy and all those kind of things. And it was actually years ago when I did one of my first gigs in America. There were two very nervous looking young women, and one of them was quite far away and the other one sort of came up on her behalf and said, I just wanted to say, with one of your songs, my friend really struggles with her mental health. And a little while ago, she was actually thinking of doing something really silly. And one of your songs came on randomly. And that was the thing that stopped her doing something really foolish and getting in touch with me instead. And that was about as nice as you could ever hear when it comes to the impact that your music might make. And I'm really big on that. That's a very important drive for me as well, the kind of community aspect. As I say, finding people that might feel uncomfortable in their own skin or a bit marginalized or a bit nerdy or nervous, or that's why subcultures are so important, whether it's My Little Pony fandom or steampunk or comics or horror or whatever it might be. Those kind of community things are really key, and I really love being part of those, or even just visiting and saying, oh, what you're doing here, all dressing up as squirrels, is a brilliant thing and you should carry on doing it. Congratulations to you all. Goodbye.
And you do, I mean, I know that you do have a very sort of active, engaged, quite loving relationship with your community, and you're quite proactive in that. Can you tell us a little bit about like what that looks like and how you generate it and the kind of work it takes to have that kind of interaction that's still personalized when you're doing things on, social and YouTube and at scale and at Glastonbury and things like that too?
Yeah, I think authenticity is the key. Like, if I send out a mailing and saying like, how are you doing? I actually mean it. And I will sometimes say, look, if you're having a really bad time at the moment, you can email me. And I might take ages to reply, but I will reply. And if you haven't, or I might say, this particular group of people are having like, I remember teachers during the pandemic, it's like, teachers having a really tough time at the moment. So if you email me and you're a teacher, I'll send you some of my tea, stuff like that. That is just, just little ways of reaching out and communicating with people, because those in themselves just lead, they lead to lovely friendships, creative collaborations, or just nice moments where someone says, oh, actually, I'm having a really rough time. Thanks for getting in touch. And I can send them I'm aware that it has a tiny place. It's only a small distraction in someone's life, but the kindness of a stranger can mean a lot, and it has meant a lot to me in the past. People have been very kind to me, so I think it goes both ways. So yeah, nurturing that community is a lovely thing. And there's a group on Facebook called the School of Whimsy, who are always very kind and generous with their time, and we put on an event every year. And also a thing called Patreon, which if you are a creative person listening to this, I really recommend. I particularly like it. It's not without its flaws, but people basically pay you a bit of money each month at various different levels, and you reward them with your creative output. And reward, perhaps pushing it with me, but I am nothing if not prolific. I do create a lot of stuff, so it works really well for me, because almost every week I go, ha, I have a new song, or look at this picture I've done with somebody, or whatever it might be. So that works really well.
Yeah, I love that impact of bringing people along, and that a lot of your songs are about supporting being who you are and being vulnerable. I think there's a lot of kind of sweetness in your approach and in people's experience of you that gives hope, and I think that's one of when art is at its best, isn't it? It's transformatory. It meets you, the song that comes on just when you need it, the picture that inspires you to see things differently, the book that you turn to over and over again, the poem that you love to, in its best, it says something to our kind of heart and soul in a way that's very nourishing. So I really hear your generosity in that impact as well. In terms of your measure of I'm a freelancer with a family and I've got to make this thing work, like, is there a bean that you count? Like, is it about number of gigs? Is it revenue? Is it like how, what's a measure aside from the like social impact of like, I can keep going with this? Because I think for freelancers, that's often like an anxious question. How do you manage that?
Yeah, I have a set amount that I like to pay myself every month. Obviously, we all have a certain amount that we have to get to make sure the bills and the mortgage are paid. So there is that set amount, and a certain amount of gigs that I get. But then that has a sort of top end as well, because too many gigs and I don't have a family life, and I'll be living on my own in my office. So I've got to kind of get that constant balance of not doing too much. But that in itself can be quite good as well, because it stops me over stretching myself. Yeah, I have a lot of different tiny streams of income, and it's a question of trying to maximize all of them. Most of the money still comes from gigs. There'll be a bit from Patreon, there'll be some from streaming, although they take as much as possible. There'll be bits from pieces from my merchandise, and you also have to be, again, the tenacity comes back to it, because in these days and times gigs can get cancelled a lot more easily. That can happen quite frequently. Events don't happen for one reason or another, and then you have to go, shit, well, I now need to go out of my way to find a new stream of income for next month, because I've just lost a chunk. Again, that's not that all freelancers have to deal with that to a certain extent, but yeah, keeps you on your toes.
Yeah, there's something about this kind of, it sounds simple when it's like, it's just me, I don't employ anyone, I'm not responsible to anyone, but you're still a kind of micro business model. You still have a range of product lines, you still have sales, business development, product development, execution, invoicing, finance department. It's all you. Also catering, cleaning, health and safety.
We're not all good at all of those things as well.
Absolutely.
All of us are good at different bits, and that's something that I'm definitely realizing as time goes on, you have to, one of the other reasons for collaborating is to farm out the parts that you're not that good at and focus on the bits that you can do. But yeah, and inevitably being sort of, creative type means that I'm not necessarily great with money. My general rule is to make slightly more than I need to account for the fact that I'm a bit shit. with the money that I have. A combination of that and quite modest taste seems to just about keep me afloat.
And I think for me, it's quite an interesting dilemma of the equation, because I'm very, of course, the job for life is dead. We can do loads of different things. There is more agility in careers and stuff. But I still believe that people are designed for specific things in which they are phenomenal and remarkable. And that as much as possible, if you stay in that lane, the happier you are and the more successful that you are. And of course, as an entrepreneur myself and working with lots of people who are freelancers or wearing lots of hats for a variety of reasons, there is this case of like, yes, this is my sweet spot, but there's also a whole bunch of other things that I do need to be relatively competent at to have the chance to use my sweet spot, which doesn't happen quite so much when you're formally employed, because you have a slightly narrower range anyway about your remit and specialism. So it's kind of in some ways easier to stay in the lane of excellence because you're sort of constrained by other people's roles within an organization. So it's an interesting tension, I think.
Yeah, I think you've nailed it. And I think that's one of the advantages of being self-employed, is it forces you out of your comfort zone, whether you like it or not. There must have been so many times where you've had to wear a hat that you're not that comfortable with, but there's no one else to wear it, so you better put it on and try it on for size for a bit. So yeah, you're absolutely right.
I'll tell you just a brief story about it before we move into environment, because I think it's kind of interesting for me. Is what I'm not good at is marketing. I don't mind sort of sales, business development stuff, but I find like social media and this sort of balance about what to say and how to say it and what makes it punchy and viral and stuff like completely confusing and overwhelming. It's really, I'm really not very good at it. And kind of colder outreach, quite difficult. And that was actually part of why I set up the podcast, because I was like, hang on a minute, I'm a careers expert. I know how to fix this. And when I went back to my equation is I'll use my skills in talking to strangers and my passion for practical life education to help people really connect with the work that they love and help organizations do great work. And I was like, okay, that's what's wrong. I'm not talking to strangers. And, the podcast is the perfect medium for the world of marketing and social for me, because I don't have to master all those things. I can stay in the bit that I'm really great at, which is asking good questions. So it's kind of a good example of how the equation can help you find the other way around it. But certainly there are definitely places where I'm like, I would love to be better, but I'm just not. And I also, because I run a company, I'm lucky enough to be able to subcontract some of this out to people who are brilliant at it. And it sounds like you get around that through collaboration. But let's move on to environment. I know we could talk all day about lots of good things, but I want to hear about when things went wrong. So in the environment question, we always ask for like moments where you were not empowered to be at your best and it was awkward, difficult or uncomfortable, because we believe in the equation model that environment can really make the biggest difference. Even if the other three plates are spinning nicely, if you then get plonked in an environment that doesn't support you, things can really go awry. And I'm guessing that is particularly true if you're a nutty professor. Tell us about that.
I think as well, because of the kind of the downside of the sort of music that I make and the sort of character that he is and the sort of person I am, is I know plenty of musicians and comedians who don't care so much about being liked. They're like, I do my thing, I go out there and I'm done. Whereas I really want people to like me. And that's true. Well, exactly, which is a disaster if your performing environment is completely wrong. And I think particularly when I was a bit younger, that need could be a little bit more desperate. The less people liked me, the more I wanted them to like me, the less likable I was, because no one wants someone sort of rapping in their face going, please like me. That's an awful thing to do. So probably the very worst, I've got many stories of things that didn't work. So probably one of the worst gig experiences I had where I was really mismatched was a corporate gig. I don't do very well in corporate shows. From time to time I do. If it's a Christmas party for a fun-loving company and they want entertaining, then I can absolutely smash it. I've had some lovely experiences. But the more formal it is, the less it works. And I think I find myself wanting to rebel. And I had an award ceremony. It was a lovely award ceremony for people who were sort of excellence in science, I think, and for various sort of different companies and things that they provided, a particular quite obscure scientific field. And I'd written some comedy to go in between with a friend of mine. And I was trying to be like I was on the inside looking out with these people saying, oh yeah, what about the new such and such? So I tried to get done loads of research on it. But it was very apparent that I wasn't on the inside. I was someone who'd come from the outside and was trying to look like I was part of their gang. And when it's something as complex as a particular field of science, you very quickly, you can get something wrong without even realizing it, and suddenly the joke doesn't work. And it just started to unravel really early on. And the silences got longer just as your comedy gig went. And by the time I was announced the awards, it was something quite sort of funeral-like about the whole thing. And I'd managed to turn, and I felt so bad about it as well, because these were good people finally getting a chance to celebrate the excellence of their profession. And they had this idiot just presenting things really poorly. And of course, once you lose confidence in a gig as well, that starts to show. You start to get the kind of sweats and start to mess up the few good things that you have got to say. And it was just really, really bleak. It's not the sort of funniest failure I've had, but I think it's sort of the most appropriate to this podcast, because it shows the kind of environment that I don't work so well in as the professor. As a little tiny side note, I've done work in a few different companies doing talks about inclusivity and LGBTQ stuff, not as the professor, acknowledging that I am him, but from the point of view of, look, I'm a relatively straight, white, middle-class man, and I'm going to talk about diversity, because who better to talk about it than someone who is also trying to catch up with the world themselves? And that works perfectly well. But I think there are certain environments where you don't put Professor Elemental, and in a corporate one is the top of that list.
Yeah, I think it's a great story. And I think, that it really beautifully exemplifies, you can have the skills, passion, impact. You can be going, yeah, I love what I do and it feels really good balance, but it can still go horribly wrong in the wrong environment. And the extra painful thing about live is you can't go and do it better next time. If you're doing product development, you develop a minimum viable product and it's a bit rubbish, then you get great feedback from your client and you get the chance to do it again and again and again until the thing is beautiful, and then you launch it and it's wonderful. That's great. But if you're live, that moment will never be again. So if it's dreadful, you're dying, you know that you're dying, you've got to get to the end of that hour, because you can't just go, can I just stop? I mean, that is, that it takes a certain level of courage and resilience and gung-ho and kind of letting go. And that is kind of similar in like coaching, facilitating, speaking for a living. I know exactly that feeling of like the tide is not turning the way I want it to, but I have to keep going because this client needs me to complete this project, even if it's a fiasco. And then I have to lick my wounds later, and I can never redeem that moment. That moment is what it was. Right. I can just take it and learn from it and move forward. So I think that's incredibly helpful to share.
Yeah, the letting go part is really key, isn't it? We all have those moments at 3 a.m. where we wake up going, oh, I can't believe I said that thing to that person. And it's now on a much bigger scale, And even when gigs go well, I'm sure it's the same with facilitators. And when you're talking, you can have actually had a really good session with someone that you facilitated, but you might have answered one thing wrong. Maybe on this podcast, I'll hear it back and go, oh, why did I say that thing? And it's really important to try and steer your silly monkey brain away from those mini failures that exist sometimes within overall successes. I've talked about it on stage. I've had gigs that have gone really well and 10 people come up and go, oh, mate, nice gig. If one person comes up and goes, yeah, I didn't really like that song about the Vikings that you did. I thought you performed that really badly. That is all you will think about. It's so easy to focus on tiny little mini failures as well.
Yeah, and that's such a lesson, isn't it? Just to notice 99% of what you did was great, and the 1% isn't. Even better if for next time, and not to hit yourself over the head with that, Yeah. So we've got to gather all these bits together now so we can get some insights. So I'm going to invite you to make a sort of messy draft of your first ever career design, which is the sort of output that comes from the equation. So I'm going to say some things and you're going to fill in the gaps with just like 2 or 3 words here or there. But to set you off on the path to success, because I know that isn't always the case, I'm going to ask you a nice, easy question, which is, I'm going to say the word I, and then you're going to respond by filling in the gap with your name. Okay? Ready?
Yes.
I,
Paul Alborough.
Excellent. Will use my skills in 2 or 3 key headlines for you that must be there.
Creative collaborations.
And my passion for
community and communication.
Snazzy. 2. What's the result you'd like to see?
Maintain and grow my career into my old age.
An environment that is
nurturing and joyful.
anything about the people that you touch or the ways that you work that help you do your best work? An environment that we should add to nurturing and joyful?
With people whose company that I enjoy,
Mm-hmm.
and groups of people that I can lift up whilst simultaneously being lifted up. That's really poorly put, but you know what I mean by it.
Yeah, I do. So I'm going to play this back to you. I, Paul Alborough, will use my skills in creative collaboration and my passion for community and communication to maintain and grow my career into my old age. An environment that is nurturing and joyful, with people whose company I enjoy and with groups that I can lift up and be lifted up by, works best for me.
God, that's good. I'm having that typed out in fancy lettering and framed on my wall. I love it.
It's good work.
Oh, that's nice. I really like it. I'm delighted by that. And it's nice to feel that I'm on the right track. I suppose the next stage as well, if I was going to look kind of almost beyond what we've talked about, is areas to diversify into in terms of specifics. But that's a whole other podcast that I'll consider at a future time.
No, it's not another podcast. It's the next question, actually.
Oh, great.
But I would like to hear, how does it feel hearing that? And if you were scoring that in terms of like 1 is not at all and 10 out of 10, where are you? So how does it feel? And where would you score it?
It feels really good, actually. I rarely take stock in that way, so I'm feeling great about it. And I'm going to score it. I'm going to score it a solid 9, because that's exactly how I want the world to move in that direction. And I've lost a point only through my own inability to communicate effectively.
Okay. And there's always good to have a little bit of room for growth, right?
I think
So
yeah.
What's beautiful is that you already have an equation that you feel like you pretty much fully embody, that like day to day, this is what I do. I am doing this and living this, which is wonderful to hear and see. And you asked the question at the beginning, what's the next threshold on this? So how do I future-proof it so I can keep doing this? What are the next iterations and thoughts that I have? So tell me where that takes you. Like, what have you already considered? What are you thinking about? What's coming through on that side?
Well, it's a slightly tricky one because I have had some lovely freelance writing work, writing children's stories for apps and for podcasts and stuff, and I can do that pretty well. But the things that I diversify into are also things where people are struggling. Copywriters I know are finding it really difficult at the moment. There's not freelance. It's not really the time to get into freelance writing. So I suppose it's all about continuing to sort of seize as many opportunities as possible and try and find things that are just slightly out of my comfort zone wherever possible. And I suppose in terms of, the most successful things are actually the things that I am in control of myself. Things like Kickstarter still work really well.
Mm-hmm.
And I've had some really successful campaigns doing that. They're a lot of work. So I think keeping an eye out for all possible future opportunities that might be a bit of a new challenge, but maintaining that base and not, I might need to edit this a little bit better.
Can I make a suggestion?
Please.
It strikes me that here are a few things that come through for me. One is you're an educator. You have an educational background, but you are also using the things that you know about and the things that you care about and the things you've learned from your community to educate others. And the word educare actually means to lead out from. And I think you do that really beautifully and in very joyful, playful, zany ways. But you've also told us that some of it is literally life-saving. So I hear what you're saying about the creative industries. We are currently volunteering our time to the TV and film environments because those freelance communities are being decimated. More about that later on the podcast. But it strikes me that you have a huge amount of value to add in the educational realm. Say some more about that.
I think that's really good, really interesting. Someone suggested the other day that I write sort of a Professor Elemental self-help book.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there may be some potential in, I said how much I enjoy working with groups and subcultures, going to comic conventions or sci-fi things or whatever. I've done a few lectures about the importance of creativity and that kind of thing. And there's a possible, there may be ways that I could slightly even formalize that. I know people who do, I don't know, almost like mental health courses on Patreon, for example, where they do a little streaming series of lessons and that kind of stuff. And that might be the next logical step where I could still, use all the things that I find valuable and embody them in a new way and communicate with new people, because that is an area where there's a lot of scope for growth, I think. So that's really good. Thanks.
You have this wonderful community. I want to know what they want to learn from you. Have you asked them?
Yeah. That's a really good point. No, I haven't. And that's a lovely, normally I'm just shoving ideas at them going, what about this? Do you like this? But actually asking some questions of the community and talking to, I'm lucky enough to have such a wonderful line of communication. And a lot of the people that listen to my music are sort of friends as well. There's people that sort of blur those two lines between listeners and being friends or colleagues. And talking to them and finding out more about what they might want is a really nice way to grow things in a way that's going to benefit everybody, which would be lovely.
Yeah. And of course, you talked about collaboration as well. So you don't have to have all of the answers to the questions. They may say, we would really love to hear about mental health or about creativity or the writing process, or, you may have some of the answers, but I'm sure that you also would have a great deal of fun coming up with the answers in a team with others who you know and trust as well. So how has this process been for you?
I mean, as a rapper, there is nothing I like more than talking about myself at the best of times. But this has been absolutely fascinating, really eye-opening, particularly in terms of the kind of questions that you asked and how you interpreted them. That's been completely new for me. So, yeah, I'm very grateful. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to kind of talk about it and think about what the next steps are. How brilliant.
My pleasure. It's been extremely fun. And, it really, I think, will add a lot of value to people who are listening. So thank you for that. Final question. If we were looking back at that little Paul who, with full of spunk and vim, chucked off the cool band and insisted on his sketch show going live, what advice and support would you give him now, talking back to him?
First of all, learn to dance, for God's sake. Think about how other people see you at that school. Delete that. That's not putting that in. I would say to that little Paul that you're on the right track. Okay, so don't listen to the naysayers. But if anything, do everything as you're doing it, but have a bit more confidence in your creativity. You can actually make a living out of it. In some ways, I wouldn't want to say anything to him because I wouldn't have ended up exactly here if I hadn't had all the jobs I didn't like and developed all of those extra skills through the jobs that I didn't enjoy. However, it took a long while to get here, and it was only getting to about 30 years old that I even dreamed that you could have a life as a freelance creative person. And actually, I would say to anybody else out there, if I can spend 15 years as the breadwinner for a family by putting on a pith helmet and dancing around and making rap songs about imaginary monkeys, then the chances are if you've got something creative that you want to do or make a living out of, you probably can do it. So give it a try. As a friend of mine said, when I was not sure whether to leave a shit job and pursue a life of creativity, they very clearly said, look, mate, if it fails, there's plenty of other shit jobs out there. You just go back to one of those. So you've got literally nothing to lose. And I've always remembered that.
Thank you so much. It's been brilliant.
Thank you for tuning in to today's episode of the Career Equation podcast.
Stay connected with us on socials for more career insights, behind-the-scenes moments, and updates on upcoming episodes. And if you'd like to work with us, visit the Career Equation website or click the links in the show notes.
Remember, the Career Equation isn't just a podcast. It's a journey towards unlocking your full potential, enjoying your life, and doing remarkable stuff.
Until next time, keep solving those career equations and pursuing your path to success.
And don't forget to share your thoughts and feedback with us. Your input shapes the future of our show.
Until next time, keep solving those career equations and pursuing your path to success. This is Erica Sosna
and Zoe Schofield. Signing off.